Hello everyone. In this video we are going to talk about centralized version control and distributed version control. In this talk we will learn what is the difference between centralized version and distributed and what makes distributed version control superior than centralized version control. When we are talking about centralized version control, it's a traditional version control system which we used to use previously, and the example of centralized version control are CVS, Subversion, Visual Source Code C. So centralized version control is a server with database, client have a working version, and there are the challenges multi-developer conflict and client-server communication. So let's understand centralized version control with the use of a diagram. So when we are talking about a centralized version control, there will be a central repository like this, okay, and client will be connecting to the central repository. So we will be having a working directory of a repository. We will not be having a repository on our local. We will be just having a working directory of that repository, and we will be communicating with a central repository for our commits or update. So for the example, Bob did some change and he want to push those changes or commit those changes. So he will do those changes and will commit those changes to the central repository. And if he has to get some update done by other developer, then he has to pull the changes from the central repository. So all your history, versions of the file and everything is stored on the central. On your local, only you have the working copy, just files and the metadata to get the information from the central repository. So let's understand with another example. So here if you see, there is a central repository on the server and we have the working copy. So there are different, like for the example, Joel's working directory, Rose working directory and Bob's working directory. So it will be on your desktop and the server will be there somewhere on the remote. So using svn up command, which is known as svn update, we will be updating our source code, and using svn commit will be committing our changes to the central repository. Rose will be having her own working directory and she also can use svn up and svn commit command to communicate between the central repository and the local repository working copy. Now let's go to the distributed version control part. When we are talking about distributed version control, we say it's distributed in nature. It means everyone will be having a repository. What that mean is, like, there will be a central server which will be having a repository, and once I clone that repository on my system, I will be also having a same replica of that repository. So everyone will be having a repository instead of having working directory. In case of SVN or any centralized version control system, we were having central repo on the central repository, and we were just having working directory. But now, in case of distributed version control, we will be having a repository on the server. Once we clone, we'll be having that repository on our local. The example of distributed version control is Git, Mercury, Bitkeeper, Bazaar. Let's understand that using the example distributed version control system. So if you see, there is a central repository here, and then everyone is having the exact replica of the central repository, which is known as the local repository, and then you will be having a working copy. Okay, so what will happen? You will work on your files. First you will commit those changes to your local repository, and then you will push your changes of your local repository to the central repository using push command, and you will be getting the changes from the central repository to your local repository by using the pull command. Okay, So let's understand in more clear ways. So this is a central repository and this is a local repository on my PC, and then I am having a working copy of this. So I will be working on any file. So I will be doing the changes in my working directory. Once I complete any changes, I will be committing those changes to my repository, and then once changes are committed to my local repository, I can push those changes to central repository so that the changes has been done by me is available to other developers, and changes in the same way changes done by other developer will be available to. So what is the advantage we are getting from this in comparison of central version control system? So the advantage which we are going to get here is, first, in case of centralized version control system, the repository database was on the remote. So client was having only working copy. So disadvantage of is that if there is no network, if network is cut, or is there any problem with the central repository, we cannot do anything. We don't have any history of our files. We cannot commit our changes. We cannot sync, commit our changes. We are totally cut. So in case of SVN or any centralized version control system, everything is driven by the center. In case of distributed version control system, we have the central repository, but once we clone it, it's create a local repository which is exact replica of central repository. So all the histories, all the versions, everything you have on your local, all the branches and everything. So if you disconnect from the network also, you have locally everything, so you can work without any problem. You can do changes in your local, and after completing any changes, you can commit those changes to your local repository, and once you come into network, you can push your changes to the central repository. So that is one of the biggest advantage. And another advantage is, like, due to some reason, let us assume due to some reasons, and there is a problem with the central repository, so it's very easy because as we have the exact replica of local repository, we can copy that into our central repository again, which we cannot do in centralized version control. So that is one of the biggest advantages. And third advantage is, like, if we say DVS in full set, means basically previous diagram we talk about, like, everyone is communicating with the central repository, but it is possible to communicate from one local repository to another local repository in a distributed version control. As we told, we are having the exact replica of local repository. Okay, so it's kind of a central repository only, so we can point our repository to another local repository or another person repository, and then that another person can point to another repository. So it's easy to collaborate between multiple repositories. Okay, it's kind of a graph. So that's the reason it's called distributed version control system. Thank you very much.